The notice hung on the trading post wall for 3 weeks, unanswered and ignored. Then a battered wagon pulled up carrying a woman, 3 children, and the unmistakable scent of fresh bread. In that moment, the loneliest rancher in the territory forgot every reason he had to say no. Welcome to Dust and Heart Western Tales. Subscribe and ring the bell for more legendary tales of love, courage, and the untamed frontier. The Colorado Territory in the autumn of 1874 was a land that demanded two things of every soul who dared to inhabit it: strength and stubbornness. The mountains did not care for ambition, and the plains offered no rewards for intelligence. The winters certainly did not negotiate with hope. If a person was strong enough to endure and stubborn enough to remain, the land allowed them to stay. If not, it sent them back east with nothing but bitter stories of how hard the West truly was. Silas Greer possessed both strength and stubbornness in quantities most men would consider excessive. At 43 years old, he was built broad and solid, much like the barn he had raised with his own hands 16 years earlier. His face was weathered the way canyon walls are weathered, not ruined, but shaped and carved by years of wind, sun, and cold into something that looked permanent. His eyes were a pale, icy blue, carrying the particular flatness of a man who had stopped expecting anything from life except the labor demanded of him each morning. His ranch sat in a valley east of a town called Red Willow, consisting of 300 acres of grazing land bordered by a creek and rolling foothills. He ran 60 head of cattle, not enough to make him wealthy, but enough to keep him occupied. It justified getting up before dawn and falling into bed after dark, filling the hours between with labor so constant it left no room for the one thing he was truly trying to avoid: silence. The ranch held a house, a barn, and a bunkhouse that had once sheltered 3 hands. Now it stood empty. Silas had let them go one by one as the operation shrank and his temperament grew sharper. He had been married once to a woman named Eleanor who had auburn hair and a laugh that could make the horses turn their heads. She had come from Illinois expecting an adventure, but after 2 years the adventure became routine, and the routine became an isolation so heavy she simply packed a bag one Tuesday morning and left on the eastbound stage without a word. That was 9 years ago. Silas had not spoken her name since. He had removed every trace of her from the house, the curtains, the dishes, even the rocking chair from her mother's parlor, and stowed them in the barn loft, never to look at them again. The house became a functional space, not a home. He cooked for himself badly, eating beans and salt pork standing at the counter because sitting at the table alone meant acknowledging the empty chair across from him. By the autumn of 1874, his stubbornness had reached its limit. He had lost weight, his clothes hung loose, and his energy flagged by mid-afternoon. The ranch was suffering because the rancher was not eating enough to fuel the labor required to maintain it. He needed a cook, not a wife, not a companion, but a professional. Someone to keep the kitchen functional and leave him alone. He wrote the notice himself in a hand more functional than elegant. Cook wanted, ranch work, room and meals provided at Garrier Ranch, must tolerate silence. He nailed it to the board in Red Willow and waited. 1 week became 2, then 3. The paper curled and the pencil faded. Finally, on the 23rd day, a farm cart appeared. It was pulled by a single exhausted mule and covered in canvas that had seen better decades. Silas stood on his porch, arms crossed, his pale eyes already preparing reasons to say no. A woman named Abigail Harding climbed down. She was 31, with dark hair pulled into a practical bun and eyes that were simultaneously tired and alert. She wore a faded calico dress and boots that were worn but well-maintained. Then 3 children appeared from behind the canvas: Samuel, a serious 10-year-old, Nell, a determined 7-year-old, and Henry, a 4-year-old clutching a wooden horse. Abigail walked to the gate and looked Silas directly in the eye. "I am here about the notice," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I can cook, sir, but I come with 3 children. We come as a family or not at all." Silas looked at the children, the mule eating his grass, and the vast, indifferent sky. Everything in his solitary existence told him to refuse. He wanted a cook, not a family. He wanted quiet, not the chaos of children. "Can you make biscuits?" he asked, the question surprising even himself. Abigail didn't boast. She simply stated a fact. I can make biscuits that would make you forget your own name. Silas was quiet for a long moment as the wind moved through the valley. Kitchen is through the front door on the left, he finally said. Bunkhouse is clean. You and the children can have it. Meals at dawn, noon, and sundown. What about the silence? Abigail asked as he turned to go. Your notice said must tolerate silence. I have 3 children, Mr. Greer. Silence is not something we carry in abundance. Silas looked back over his shoulder. For the first time in years, something moved at the corner of his mouth, the ghost of a smile. I suppose I will have to tolerate the noise instead, he replied. That afternoon, Abigail cleaned the bunkhouse with an efficiency that suggested she had been reclaiming spaces her whole life. She made beds, hung clothes, and placed a small drawing of a wildflower on a shelf. Beauty, she believed, was a necessity disguised as a luxury. At sundown, she cooked her first meal. Silas sat at the kitchen table for the first time in 3 years because she had set a place with a plate, a fork, and a folded napkin. The smell of golden warm biscuits filled rooms that had known only dust and loneliness for nearly a decade. Silas took a bite and chewed slowly. Something tectonic shifted behind his eyes. A part of him that had been frozen for years began to thaw despite his best efforts. These are acceptable, he said. Abigail recognized the language of a man protecting himself with understatement. I will take acceptable, she said, for now. In the days that followed, a rhythm established itself. Abigail cooked stews that warmed him from the inside and pies made from dried apples. She scrubbed floors and washed windows that hadn't been transparent in years. She did all of this with the quiet authority of a woman who had been running things alone for a long time. Silas watched his house change the way a man watches a river change the shape of the land, slowly, inevitably, and without any desire to stop it. The children were harder to ignore. Samuel was watchful, his distrust a mirror of Silas's own. He had lost his father to a mine collapse and knew that men you depend on can disappear. Nell was the opposite, a constant rain of questions. Do horses dream? Why don't you smile, Mr. Greer? And then there was Henry, the smallest siege weapon, who followed Silas like a shadow and insisted the rancher inspect his wooden horse captain. One morning, Henry offered the toy to Silas. You can hold him if you want. He is brave. Silas took the small wooden horse in his large, calloused hands, holding it with the reverence one gives to something that matters. Thank you, he said. As he sat on the porch holding the toy, he realized his walls were being dismantled, not by force, but by a woman who made biscuits that tasted like forgiveness and children who refused to let him remain a ghost. One evening, Abigail told him her story. Her husband, James, had been a good man, a miner who died when a mountain collapsed 2 years prior. She had sold what they had and moved 3 times looking for work, but no one wanted a family. You are the first person who said yes, she told him. Silas looked out at the fading light. I said yes to the biscuits, he said quietly. The family was unexpected, but now I cannot remember what the silence sounded like, and I do not want to. As winter deepened, Silas found himself reclaiming his life. He repaired Eleanor's old rocking chair and placed it on the porch without a word. He carved a new wooden horse for Henry, a lieutenant for the captain. He worked side by side with Samuel, showing the boy through action that reliability was a form of love. When Samuel finally asked Silas to teach him how to build a fence, a wound in both of them began to heal. By spring, the ranch was no longer just a functional space. It was a home. It was loud, messy, and full of life. Abigail and Silas communicated in the language of frontier people, through mended shirts, fixed roofs, and wildflowers left in jars by the window. It was Nell who finally broke the tension, asking Silas with 7-year-old directness, Are you going to marry my mother because you look at her the way Papa used to? Silas proposed that evening on the porch. I put that notice up looking for a cook, he said. I believe I found considerably more than that. I am asking you to stay, Abigail. It was the first time he had used her name, and the sound of it broke the last of his self-imposed silence. Then I will stay, she replied. We will all stay. They married in June in the yard between the house and the barn. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, Henry held up his wooden horses and shouted, "Captain says yes!" Everyone laughed, including Silas, a real deep laugh that felt like sunrise after a long night. Years passed and the ranch flourished. Samuel became a cattleman, Nell the territory's most organized soul, and Henry a horseman. Silas Greer, the man who once demanded silence, spent the rest of his days surrounded by the most beautiful noise he had ever heard. The original notice remained at the trading post for years, faded and curled, but the whole town knew the answer it received. It wasn't just a cook who answered that call, it was a family, the kind that dismantles your walls and leaves small boots by your door until you can no longer imagine life without them.